All my trades are difficult. All of my trades are difficult. There is no such thing as an easy trade. Actually, I said it in the past that the only easy trade was the last trade you just closed out at a profit. There is no such thing as an easy trade. You get into something, market's going to move, you got to deal with it. I do not concern myself with the volatility or the squiggles in between the time when I put a trade on and when I take it off. The only thing I am concerned about as a trader is making money. So what interests me is where I close out the trade and making sure that when I do close it out, it is a profit. And that happens every time. What happens in the meantime, that is of no concern to me. It may cause me to have to manage that in a way, but I do not stop myself out. I do not take losses. I've been all through this. I mean, when you take losses, you lose, and that's why people lose. They choose to lose. I have always said this, that losing is a choice. All right, but I don't want to talk about this right now. I want to talk a little bit more about the so-called Trump stimulus effect, which we've been hearing a lot about, which we really don't know what the concrete proposals are going to be. The market's running up on expectation. There was an interesting article on Brad DeLong's blog. Brad DeLong is an economist at UC Berkeley, and he kind of, calls BS on this whole economic boom outlook. Now, some of the things I agree with. Maybe some of the things, it seems to me he left out some things. But anyway, there was one thing in particular that he spoke about, and I want to talk about that, and that is Trump's promise to repeal and replace Obamacare. Now, I am not arguing whether or not Obamacare is a good thing. I think there are some major failings in that law, okay? And the good part, I do think, is the pre-existing conditions. However, I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to talk about the fiscal aspect of this, which, again, is not really being discussed. So I went back and I crunched some numbers in the period, the pre-Obamacare period, and then the period starting in 2014 when Americans were required to have insurance under the Affordable Care Act, okay? So from 2010 to 2013, basically the government was spending a combined about $800 billion on combined Medicare and Medicaid costs, okay? That's a net. Remember, when they spend, that is a fiscal flow. That is a net flow to the non-government, and that flows to income of the non-government. About 800 billion, and it was increasing on average at about 45 billion per year from 2010 to 2013. Now, when we went to 2014, that jumped up to about 67 billion, I believe, just off the top of my head. I looked at it earlier, 67 billion. So that was about a 48% increase in that spending. I'm sorry, 67 billion net increase. So we went up to, about 867, call it 870 billion, all right? And then in 2015, that went up to 975 billion, almost a trillion. So it jumped 200 billion in the 2 years that the law was enacted, or when it became required that Americans have health insurance. And those increases were based mainly on the fact that the government was supplying subsidies to those who were eligible, who could not afford the insurance. So that was, again, a net positive income effect to the economy. So from a fiscal standpoint, this repeal and replace, and we don't know what the Republican replacement plan is going to be. I mean, they just keep saying we're going to replace it, but we don't know. But right now, a repeal, a straight repeal, would have a massive negative fiscal effect, all right? From massive to significant, let's put it that way, fiscal effect. Not being talked about. Not being talked about. Everybody's hoorah! Trump effect, woo! Boom, yeah, incredible. Then there's other things I wanted to talk about. I wanted to point out the fiscal effect of the Obamacare repeal and replace. But then, you have the infrastructure spending where he promised to rebuild the infrastructure of the United States. But now, what is it? It is a tax credit to hedge funds and private investors to build the infrastructure that they deem, that they want to build, and then to charge money for it, for its use. So the taxpayers basically get screwed twice, right? They have to foot the bill in the form of tax credits. And you might say, well, Mike, it's a tax credit. They don't have to pay anything. But remember the mentality here. The mentality is we are out of money, right? We don't spend anymore. We are out of, everything has to have an offsetting cut if they're going to spend. So if the tax credits result in lower revenues to the government, then the government will say, hey, sorry, all you people who, were on Medicare or whatever, or any sort of other government spending programs that support, let's say, the middle class or the poor. We can't do it anymore. Sorry, public schools. Sorry, Health and Human Services. Sorry, Housing and Urban Development, all that stuff. So it's a tax on the middle class and the poor. And then when they're driving on those roads that the billionaires like Wilbur Ross builds, they got to pay him. All right? So it's a double screw job, number one. Well, number two, I should say. The first thing was the Obamacare repeal and replace. These are the stimulus. This is the stimulus that everybody's going crazy about, okay? Then you have the deregulation. So the deregulation, what is that going to do? I don't know what that's going to do. We have to look, I think, at the bank sector. That could be interesting. I have to say that could be interesting because if you repeal Dodd-Frank and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, maybe that will foster higher levels of lending, and we can get into another one of these wild periods, probably in the housing market. That's why I'm keeping my home builder stocks, because if you look at housing starts now, they're still way below where they need to be just to replenish the housing stock of the country. So that's something we don't know. Environmental regulations, DeLong says he doubts a lot of those things are going to pass, cutting back on environmental regulations. And what else? And by the way, he points out that this whole shale boom we've been in for the last number of years, and that was a big capital spending boom that helped the economy. That's pretty much done. That's pretty much done. You're not going to get another one of those things with the deregulation that he's talking about. And then the thing about DeLong's piece, he doesn't talk about the cuts. So I mentioned other than the cuts in Obamacare, but there's going to be further cuts in Medicare. You got what's his name, Ben Carson at HUD. He's an austerity guy. You have Betsy DeVos at the Education Department. She's hardline anti-public school. You're going to get cuts there. All right? You're going to get a rate increase next week. So I don't know. I mean, everything's rah, fantastic, wonderful. Hey, boom, economic boom, Trump, yeah. Then Trump brings in, now he just appointed Gary+Cohn, who's I think he's the CFO of Goldman Sachs. He's coming in to run the Council of Economic Advisors, the White House Council. So here's a guy, Trump, who went crazy on Hillary Clinton all during the campaign about how she's so hooked in with Wall Street and particularly Goldman Sachs. And who's he bringing in? He's bringing in the CFO of Goldman Sachs to run his whole economic unit within the White House. And then he brought in that Mnuchin dude who's going to run the Treasury, who was also running a hedge fund, who also worked at Goldman Sachs. So, I mean, come on, really. For me, I don't care. I'm just going to make money. But I mean, for the people, the working class, I mean, that looks like a backstab to me. I don't know what else to say. All right, everybody, let's watch the stock market go up even more. Yeah.